Resident Evil has abandoned dozens of survivors who should have changed the entire series. One of them helped kill Albert Wesker, then vanished. Another escaped with a sample of one of the deadliest viruses ever created, and we still don't know who she delivered it to. And one child was taken home by Barry Burton while carrying a secret so dangerous it could eventually destroy his entire family. So what actually happened to every forgotten Resident Evil character? And which missing survivor is still the greatest threat? To answer that, we have to go all the way back to the night before the mansion incident, when a convicted murderer walked alone into the Arklay Mountains and was never seen again. Billy Cohen. Billy Cohen's final scene lasts less than 2 minutes. Rebecca takes his dog tags, tells him that Billy Cohen is officially dead, and watches him leave. He gives her a salute. She gives one back, then he turns toward the mountains and walks out of Resident Evil forever. That is still his last confirmed moment in the main story, which is strange, because Billy had just survived enough material for 3 separate games. He begins Resident Evil 0 handcuffed inside a crashed military transport. The other passengers are dead. Military police are looking for him. Rebecca has every reason to assume he murdered the men transporting him, and Billy has no reason to trust a STRS officer who could drag him straight back to execution. Then the dead get up. Billy and Rebecca are forced together aboard the Ecliptic Express, through Umbrella's old training facility, and eventually into the laboratory beneath it. The partnership works because neither character has much choice. Billy can handle himself, Rebecca understands medicine, and both are trapped inside an outbreak that has already killed almost everybody else nearby. They argue, they separate, they keep coming back for each other, and during all of this, Rebecca learns why Billy was sentenced to death. His Marine unit had been deployed into Africa. Their mission collapsed. Men died from heat and exhaustion. Their intelligence was bad, and by the time they reached the village they had been ordered to attack, only 4 soldiers remained. Their commanding officer still demanded that the village be wiped out. Billy refused. The massacre happened anyway, and the surviving unit blamed him for the deaths. Resident Evil 0 never gives Billy a courtroom vindication. There is no file clearing his name. No surviving witness appears with the evidence. Rebecca simply believes him, and after everything they survived together, she decides to give him the only freedom she can. She reports him dead. That creates a fairly brutal practical problem. Billy is alive, although his legal identity is gone. If he returns to the military, he is executed. If he walks into a police station, he has to explain a destroyed train, an Umbrella laboratory, a giant leech wearing a dead man's face, and why the rookie medic who found him later lied in an official report. Umbrella still has enormous reach in 1998. Billy has no documents, no allies we know about, and possibly no idea that Raccoon City is about to become the center of the largest biological disaster in American history. Fans have spent years trying to place him somewhere after the ending. Maybe he escaped the mountains before the city was destroyed. Maybe he stayed hidden under another name. Some people even wondered if Capcom would bring him back through the BSAA, because recruiting a falsely accused former Marine would make a certain amount of sense. None of that is confirmed. Later games reuse Billy in bonus modes, cards, mobile appearances, and crossover material, but those aren't a continuation of his life. Rebecca returns. Billy doesn't. Even Resident Evil's CG films, which have pulled in characters from all over the timeline, have left him alone. And honestly, his disappearance may be the one ending on this list that actually feels deliberate. Rebecca gave Billy a second life by declaring the first one dead. Showing us exactly where he went could weaken that scene. Still, he walked away from the first major outbreak in the timeline with first-hand knowledge of Umbrella, James Marcus, and the progenitor research behind the T-virus. That information would become priceless within months. Billy had all of it. Then he disappeared into the trees. Carlos Oliveira. There is a moment near the end of Resident Evil 3 where Carlos Oliveira has every excuse to leave. Raccoon City is collapsing, his unit has been fed into a disaster under false pretenses, and the woman he has been helping is unconscious with a virus Umbrella created. Carlos stays. He searches a hospital full of infected patients and hunter betas, finds the equipment needed to produce a vaccine, holds off an entire siege, and brings Jill back. Depending on which version of Resident Evil 3 you grew up with, the details around that rescue change. The important part survives both versions. Jill Valentine leaves Raccoon City alive because Carlos refuses to abandon her. And then, nothing. Carlos was introduced as a member of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service. On paper, that sounds like an elite rescue unit. In practice, Umbrella filled the UBCS with mercenaries and convicted soldiers, sent them into contaminated zones, and treated the survivors as disposable witnesses. Carlos enters Raccoon believing the company has sent him to rescue civilians. He gradually realizes Umbrella knew far more than it admitted. The original game lets him meet Jill inside the Raccoon City Police Department. The remake gives him a much stronger introduction, along with more time beside Tyrell Patrick, and lets him investigate the Spencer Memorial Hospital and the underground Nest 2 facility. Remake Carlos also gets one of the most satisfying lines in the whole game when he sees what Umbrella has done and decides he is finished taking orders from them. That should have made him incredibly useful after the escape. He has direct knowledge of the UBCS chain of command. He saw Nemesis, he helped create a vaccine, he entered Umbrella facilities while they were still operational, and Jill could personally confirm that he saved her life. When anti-Umbrella groups begin gathering evidence, Carlos is sitting on exactly the kind of testimony they need. Capcom never shows us him giving it. Some older supplemental material connected with the original version indicates that Carlos survived and went into hiding after Raccoon City. That fits the game, and remains the safest broad answer. He got out, and his later whereabouts are unknown. The remake timeline has offered even less. Carlos and Jill escape by helicopter. The camera leaves them there. It is tempting to turn that absence into a secret career. Fans have placed him in anti-Umbrella operations, the BCAA, South America, and basically every unnamed tactical squad with a vaguely similar build. Carlos even gets linked to Umbrella Corps from time to time, because that game loves anonymous soldiers and recycled locations. There is no solid story confirmation for any of it. Carlos leaves without Billy's barriers. His legal identity remains intact. His body carries no known infection, and Jill knows he is trustworthy. Barry, Chris, and the other surviving STRS members would have every reason to hear him out. He could have become part of the group that eventually helped destroy Umbrella. Maybe he chose a quieter life. Frankly, after Raccoon City, fair enough. The original epilogue material gives him the sense of a man getting as far away from Umbrella as possible. Carlos was a mercenary before the outbreak, and probably understood how quickly organizations erase people who know too much. But the remake made his absence harder to ignore. It gave him more agency, more evidence, and a genuine bond with Jill. Carlos now carries enough weight for Capcom to bring him back tomorrow and barely need to explain. There is also the small problem of time. Carlos was 21 during the Raccoon incident. He would still be well within the active age range of the series' older protagonists. Chris and Jill are still involved, Leon is still involved, Barry returned in his 50s. Carlos has never even received a confirmed retirement, so yes, he survived. He got Jill out, he learned Umbrella had used his entire unit, and somewhere between that helicopter and the next game, Resident Evil lost him. Hunk. Hunk is remembered like an unstoppable legend. The actual story of his only confirmed mission is basically a company disaster report with one employee still breathing at the end. Umbrella sends the security service into William Birkin's underground laboratory to seize the G-Virus. The squad corners Birkin, shoots him, and takes the samples. Then Birkin injects himself, mutates, finds them in the sewers, and tears the team apart. Hunk wakes up alone. From there, the fourth survivor follows his escape through an infected Raccoon City toward an extraction point. He carries a G-Virus sample, fights through creatures that have already overwhelmed the police and military, reaches the helicopter, and leaves. His extraction codename is Grim Reaper because this apparently keeps happening. Missions collapse, teammates die, Hunk returns. The remake makes that run feel less like a victory lap and more like accumulated bad luck. Hunk is moving through streets Leon and Claire barely crossed alive, except the escape route has filled with nearly every enemy left in the city. There are no puzzles and barely any detours. Headquarters keeps calling. Hunk keeps answering in the same flat voice while the remaining ammunition drops. His pilot Nighthawk waits at the extraction point. Even that relationship has more personality than most of Hunk's biography. The death cannot die, Nighthawk tells him. Hunk replies that the Grim Reaper is coming. Then he climbs aboard without explaining how many people were on the team when the night began. That escape is his clean story endpoint. He succeeded. Umbrella recovered a sample. Raccoon City was destroyed soon afterward, and Hunk passed into the part of Resident Evil continuity where a character appears constantly without actually doing anything new. You can play him in Mercenaries. He appears in raid mode. He has costumes, files, spin-off roles, and one of the most recognizable masks in the franchise. Operation Raccoon City builds an entire opening around the Birkin raid, although that game's branching, alternate history material cannot simply be dropped into the main timeline. Umbrella Corps surrounds itself with the legend of Hunk and even gestures toward his continued influence. It still doesn't give us a proper next chapter. The result is kind of hilarious. Hunk may be the most visible forgotten character Resident Evil has. His original bonus game ending even labels him with the line, "Death cannot die." Players turned a 10-minute escape scenario into an entire mythology because Capcom left the center empty. Hunk's neck break move, gas mask, and silence do the rest. He feels important whenever he appears, even when the appearance is a mode where story continuity has gone out for coffee. We know the job he completed. We know almost nothing about the man who completed it. His real identity is unrevealed. His age is unclear. His beliefs are unclear. We don't even know whether he stayed loyal to Umbrella once the company began collapsing. A few descriptions portray him as cold and professional, although professional covers a lot of ground when your employer manufactures tyrants. Fans often talk about Hunk as if he could walk into any outbreak and solve it. The games themselves leave him frozen in 1998, standing beside an extraction helicopter with stolen G-Virus in his kit. That sample mattered. Ada's sample mattered. Sherry's infection mattered. Birkin's work kept echoing through the series. Hunk delivered his package and never received another confirmed assignment. Ashley Graham. Ashley Graham might have the least mysterious disappearance here, which is probably healthy. Leon removes the Plaga from her body. They escape the island on a jet ski. Ashley makes a joke about Leon becoming her personal bodyguard. Leon turns her down, and she presumably goes back to the United States under the protection of an extremely embarrassed Secret Service. That's it. She survived. There is no hidden mission where Ashley joins an anti-bioterror unit. Leon's response to her at the end isn't proof of some off-screen romance either. It is a joke at the end of a game where the president's daughter has spent several hours being kidnapped by a cult. The remake gives her more independence and a much warmer relationship with Leon. She handles the castle section alone, helps operate machinery, frees Leon when the Plaga is pushing him toward Sadler's control, and talks about wanting to become someone capable of helping others. That line opens a future for her without defining one. Ashley also goes through the part everybody skips when describing a successful rescue. Sadler's people implant her. She coughs blood. The Plaga briefly drives her to raise a knife against Leon, and Sadler can pull her body under his control whenever she gets close enough. Lewis dies while trying to help them remove the parasites. Ashley reaches the laboratory knowing there is something alive inside her, and that the cult wants to use her body to carry it straight to her father. The removal procedure works. That means Ashley comes home free of the Plaga, although she carries memories of losing control while fully conscious. President Graham would also have to explain how his daughter vanished overseas, why an American agent destroyed part of a Spanish island, and why the rescue report includes a cult with weaponized parasites. We never see the debrief. I would genuinely read all 300 pages of it. Her father is out of office by the time Leon serves under President Benford. Ashley's later life could have changed with that transition. The games avoid pinning her to politics, which is probably intentional. A former president's daughter can live privately without needing to appear whenever Leon receives another assignment. Later material offers only tiny traces. In Resident Evil 6, Leon keeps a photograph connected to the Graham family on his desk, and the series occasionally refers back to the kidnapping. Ashley herself doesn't return to explain what she did after Spain. Maybe that is the answer. She went home, recovered as much as anybody could, and stayed out of every bioterror incident that followed. Good choice, Ashley. Sheva Alomar. Sheva Alomar pulls a rocket launcher from Chris Redfield's hands, braces it with him, and fires the shot that finally kills Albert Wesker. That is an absurdly important place to leave a character. Sheva's story begins long before Kajuju. Her parents worked at a factory tied to Umbrella, and when the company carried out biological testing in the region, the resulting disaster killed them. Umbrella covered it up. Sheva was taken in by her uncle, ran away when she learned he was connected to guerrillas, and eventually encountered operatives fighting against Umbrella. That path brought her into the BSAA's West Africa branch. So when Chris arrives in Kajuju, Sheva brings local authority, BSAA training, and a personal history with the company responsible for her childhood loss. Chris is the visiting agent in her territory. Resident Evil 5 puts the two of them through the entire operation together. Sheva sees the Magini infection consume civilians. She loses Captain Dechant and the BSAA team. She helps rescue Jill from Wesker's control. She boards the bomber carrying Ouroboros, crashes into a volcano, and keeps fighting while Wesker mutates into a mass of black tendrils and molten rage. Then she helps finish him. Chris and Jill had been chasing Wesker for years. Their history gives the ending most of its emotional weight, understandably. Sheva is still one of the two people physically holding the launchers. The franchise's longest-running villain dies during her first appearance. After the helicopter leaves the volcano, Sheva's confirmed story stops. There are obvious logistical reasons. She works for the BSAA's West Africa branch. Later games move to Eastern Europe, China, North America, and other regions. Chris travels constantly because the series follows him. Sheva may simply continue operating where she was assigned. A character can remain employed without following Chris into every international catastrophe, but Resident Evil has revisited the BSAA repeatedly. Revelations explores its early years. Resident Evil 6 turns it into a global military force. Village reveals that the organization is deploying a bioweapon soldier during the operation in Eastern Europe. Sheva never gets a radio call, a file, or a clear status update through any of it. Even Jill's return makes the silence noticeable. Death Island finally puts Jill back beside Chris after years of uncertainty. Rebecca is there. Claire is there. Leon is there. It is a celebration of veteran characters surviving long enough to work together. The woman who killed Wesker with Chris is absent. Fans sometimes assume Sheva left the BSAA. Others think she now leads the African branch. Either future is plausible, neither has been established. Her appearances in Mercenaries and crossover rosters tell us that Capcom remembers her design. They don't tell us where she is. There is one extra reason people keep asking. Sheva ended Resident Evil 5 in a stable position. Her body was clear of known infection. She had a job, allies, freedom, and a successful operation behind her. Most missing characters disappear because writers close their stories. Sheva's story looked ready to continue. And if the BSAA has truly become compromised, her absence becomes more than an old roster complaint. She was inside the organization. She saw what corporate bioweapons did to her family. There is no chance Sheva would casually accept the BSAA deploying one of its own. She survived Kijuju. She survived Wesker. Whatever happened next has remained off-screen for 17 years. Josh Stone. Josh Stone has a wonderfully simple contribution to Resident Evil lore. When everybody else is trapped near an erupting volcano, Josh arrives with a helicopter. He is Sheva's BSAA mentor and the leader of Delta Team. Most of that team is wiped out during the Kijuju operation. Josh survives, keeps the mission moving, and later returns in Desperate Escape, where he works with Jill after she breaks free from Wesker's control. That episode matters. Jill is exhausted, disoriented, and trying to reach Chris before the bomber leaves. Josh doesn't need a dramatic speech. He gets her through the Tricell facility, fights beside her, finds the helicopter, and reaches Chris and Sheva in time for the final extraction. All four leave alive. Josh's later fate is unknown. He could have returned to the West Africa branch with Sheva. He could have been promoted. Given how many BSAA teams get destroyed in these games, the organization should probably have put him in charge of teaching everyone how to survive past lunch. He deserves more credit for the middle of the operation as well. Josh helps Chris and Sheva with the data recovered from the dead Alpha team, survives the Magini attacks around the oil field, and takes control of a boat while infected enemies attack from every direction. When he separates from Chris and Sheva, he doesn't quietly disappear like half the support cast. Desperate Escape shows exactly where he went and turns his return into a payoff. Josh also meets Jill at one of the worst moments of her life. She has just spent years missing, medically altered, and forced to act under Wesker's control. He doesn't interrogate her or treat her like a threat. There is a mission to finish, so he helps her finish it. The episode gives Jill someone outside her old circle to rely on, while Chris and Sheva pursue Wesker. If Josh stayed with the BSAA, he would have watched the organization change, from a small alliance into a global force. He may know Sheva's current status. He may have been present when the African branch reacted to the collapse of Tricell. That is useful history sitting inside a character last seen behind helicopter controls. There is no confirmed answer. Josh completed the operation, brought Jill home, and flew out of the story. Helena Harper. Helena Harper ends Resident Evil 6 at her sister's grave. Leon tells her that the evidence Ada provided has cleared her. Helena offers him her weapon because she still believes she should be punished. Leon hands it back. The case is closed, at least officially, and Helena is allowed to return to duty with the Secret Service. It is a surprisingly complete ending for someone Capcom never uses again. Helena's entire role in the Tall Oaks disaster comes from Derek Simmons controlling her through Deborah. He forces Helena to help compromise the president's security. She knows she is assisting something catastrophic, although she cannot expose him without risking her sister's life. Then the attack happens anyway. President Benford is infected. Leon has to shoot him. Tall Oaks is consumed by the C-virus. For the early part of the game, Helena refuses to explain herself fully. This frustrated plenty of players. She keeps promising Leon answers at the cathedral, which is quite a long walk when zombies are pouring through the city and the President of the United States has just died in front of you. The answer is Deborah. Helena finds her alive beneath the cathedral, only for the C-virus to transform her. Leon and Helena are forced to fight the very person Helena compromised everything to save. Ada eventually delivers the final shot. Deborah falls into the darkness, and Helena is left with Simmons. She follows him from Tall Oaks to China. She helps expose his involvement. She watches him mutate over and over. Resident Evil 6 really gets its money out of that boss fight, and she is there when Leon finally kills him. Then Ada supplies evidence that proves Helena was coerced. Legally, that gives her somewhere to go. Emotionally, the ending leaves a mess. Her sister is dead. The president died during a breach Helena helped create. An American city was sterilized. She has been reinstated into the same kind of protective work that Simmons exploited, and Capcom leaves her at the grave. Helena could still be active. She could have resigned immediately after the ending. She could be protecting a later president off-screen. No current game has confirmed which. Her disappearance also establishes a pattern that gets much messier from here. Carlos, Sheva, and Helena clearly survive a single enormous incident, then fall out of the series. At least their endings happen in one fixed sequence. Helena's unresolved status matters for another reason. Leon's campaign ends with both of them understanding that the official record will never contain the whole event. Leon killed President Benford after infection. Helena helped create the opening Simmons used. Ada supplied the evidence that saved Helena and then disappeared. Any report clean enough to reinstate her would have been heavily classified. She returns to duty carrying secrets about the family, Simmons, and the United States' role in the Raccoon cover-up. That is a dangerous amount of knowledge for somebody whose final scene takes place in public, beside a headstone, with no security detail in sight. The next 8 survivors escaped a city through campaigns with multiple routes, conflicting endings, and optional infections. Before asking where they went, we have to work out who canonically got out at all. Kevin Ryman and Mark Wilkins. Resident Evil Outbreak refuses to give its cast one tidy helicopter ending. 8 ordinary people are caught in Raccoon City. Each scenario can be played with different combinations of survivors. Characters can die, miss one escape route, and appear perfectly healthy in the next scenario, or finish the final chapter while infected. The games were designed around repeated online runs, and their continuity behaves accordingly, so Kevin Ryman and Mark Wilkins have possible futures. Possible matters. Kevin is an RPD officer who failed the STRS selection process twice, loves a drink, and begins the outbreak inside Jay's bar. He knows the city, handles firearms well, and has the sort of casual confidence that lasts right up until a man at the next table starts eating somebody. Mark is older, a Vietnam veteran working security. He has a wife and son waiting for him. His whole reason to survive feels painfully normal beside umbrella conspiracies and mutant experiments. Mark wants to get home. Across Outbreak and Filener 2 both can travel through the burning streets, the hospital, Raccoon University, the subway, and the city's final evacuation routes. In Decisions, survivors can help create daylight, an experimental treatment that counteracts the T-virus. Depending on the ending conditions, they may escape by helicopter, reach the highway, remain infected, or fail to leave. Some end screens give character-specific epilogues. Kevin can continue moving ahead with his life. Mark can make it back to his family. The broad canon confirms that civilians survived Raccoon City and that the Outbreak cast existed. It does not lock every playable ending into one seamless sequence. The scenarios themselves also refuse a neat order. Characters who were absent from one player's escape can become the leads of the next chapter. Inventory choices determine who carries a cure. Online teams once created their own tiny versions of the outbreak every night, trying to force all of those runs into a single 8-person march through Raccoon City misses how the games tell the story. There are still clues. Kevin's connection to the RPD gives him a believable route through local police spaces. Mark's physical strength and military experience make him one of the group's anchors. Their personal epilogues were written for a reason. They show the outcomes each character is reaching toward, even if Capcom stops short of stamping every frame canon. That means saying, Kevin survived, or Mark survived, needs an asterisk. Their games allow it. Later mainline stories haven't sat them down and confirmed the route. Capcom had a perfect opportunity to fix this with the Raccoon City remakes. The hospital, police station, and streets were rebuilt in modern detail. Outbreak references were scattered around, yet Kevin never walks through the RPD, and Mark's family never receives a firm update. For a long time, that ambiguity was part of their charm. These weren't super agents guaranteed a sequel. They were two men trying to get through a doomed city with whatever they could carry. Kevin might have reached a helicopter, Mark might have reached his front door. The games let us earn those outcomes. Resident Evil still hasn't chosen one for us. Jim Chapman and George Hamilton. Jim Chapman begins Outbreak as a subway employee with a habit of complaining, which, given the evening he is having, feels reasonable. Jim enters the Outbreak with zero bioterror training or military experience. His special ability is playing dead, and even that comes with the obvious danger that the creature standing over him might decide to check. He survives through luck, street knowledge, and the occasional burst of bravery he would probably deny afterward. George Hamilton is almost his opposite. George is a surgeon. He can turn common herbs into useful medicines, understands the outbreak better than most civilians, and naturally drifts into the role of looking after everybody else. Put those two men in the same room and you can already hear Jim asking George whether a bite looks infected. Their last potential path runs through Raccoon University. The university is where Umbrella researcher Peter Jenkins arranged to meet George after stealing information from Greg Mueller. Peter is dead when the survivors arrive, but his research leads to Daylight, a reagent capable of suppressing the T-virus and destroying it within infected tissue. Daylight is a huge deal for a series that normally resolves infection with an explosion. The survivors gather the components while Thanatos, a tyrant created by Mueller, hunts them through the university. Then the route splits according to what the player carries and how the final escape unfolds. Jim and George can leave the city with Daylight in their bodies. They can carry an extra sample. They can reach the helicopter. They can also take an infected ending where the virus remains inside them as the city disappears behind the highway. That last image is grim because bus outbreak never follows it. An infected survivor leaving the quarantine zone should create another emergency immediately. The ending remains one possible branch. Canon never confirms an outbreak after the outbreak. George is the character most naturally tied to Daylight. He understands what they made. If he escaped with a sample, he would possess one of the most important medical discoveries of the Raccoon incident. Jim, meanwhile, knows the underground roots of the city and personally witnessed the disaster Umbrella helped create. The treatment also raises a practical issue later games politely ignore. Daylight is made from 3 components found around the university: V-poison, P-base, and T-blood taken from Thanatos. This is not a medicine George could reproduce from memory in an ordinary hospital. The city containing those materials is destroyed minutes after the escape. Unless somebody carries a prepared sample and preserves it, the recipe becomes another cure lost with Raccoon City. George would understand that better than anyone in the group. An extra capsule can be used offensively against Thanatos or kept for the ending. That choice has an odd weight now. Every player who fired Daylight into the Tyrant may have destroyed the only portable dose their version of the survivors could deliver outside. Neither man appears before a congressional committee. Neither joins TerraSave. Daylight itself barely becomes part of the wider franchise, even though a working anti-T-virus agent should have attracted every government and pharmaceutical company left standing. Maybe the sample was destroyed. Maybe officials classified it. Maybe the survivors escaped with only the dose already in their systems. Outbreak gives each possibility room, then moves on. Jim and George can find Daylight. Whether the world ever did is another question. David King and Cindy Lennox. David King carries a toolbox. Cindy Lennox carries kindness. Somehow, both are useful during a zombie apocalypse. David is a plumber whose past is deliberately vague. He can improvise weapons from scrap, repair broken equipment, and deal with practical problems while everybody else is still staring at them. Cindy is a waitress at Jay's bar. Her personal item is an herb case, and she is one of the best characters for keeping a group alive. Neither arrives with a conspiracy attached. I like that about them. In a normal Resident Evil game, David would be the man who repairs one lift before being found dead beside a file. Cindy would be the helpful civilian the protagonist promises to save. Shortly before a hunter enters the room, Outbreak lets them become the protagonists. They can cross the whole city, make decisions, lose companions, and keep going. Their endings carry the same continuity warning as Kevin, Mark, Jim, and George. David and Cindy can escape through the university scenario. They can leave by helicopter or highway. Depending on infection and inventory choices, they can carry daylight or remain contaminated. Their character endings suggest lives beyond Raccoon, although the main series never verifies the exact combination. File number 2 gives them even more improbable routes. The survivors can move through a zoo overrun by infected animals, revisit the hospital as an overgrown ruin, cross the subway, and enter the RPD during its final days. David can keep broken equipment useful when replacements no longer exist. Cindy's herb case effectively turns scraps of medicine into a group resource. Those abilities are game mechanics, yes, though they also tell you who these people are under pressure. David doesn't give speeches. Cindy keeps checking whether everybody is all right. That difference makes their possible endings feel personal. David leaving alone fits the guarded man he was at the start. Cindy reaching safety with other survivors fits hers. Cindy's survival has always felt especially believable. Her strength is cooperation. She starts the night serving drinks and ends it sharing medicine in places where trained response teams have already failed. David's survival makes sense for the opposite reason. Give him wire, scrap metal, and a broken weapon, and he will probably build something ugly enough to get through the next room. Capcom remembers Outbreak. Remakes contain names and locations tied to it. Alyssa eventually receives something far more substantial. David and Cindy remain faces in an old group photograph, so their status is simple. With one irritating footnote, they have valid escape endings. We can call them possible survivors. We cannot declare one precise route canon because the games never do. For two of the most capable ordinary people in Raccoon City, that is where the trail ends. Yoko Suzuki. Yoko Suzuki wakes up with gaps in her memory and a connection to Umbrella she cannot immediately explain. That already separates her from most of the Outbreak group. Everybody is trapped by Umbrella's disaster. Yoko may have helped the company before she became trapped in it. She is presented as a quiet university student, although files and scenarios reveal that she worked with Umbrella researchers. She knows the underground laboratory. Former colleague Monica treats her like a loose end and steals a G-Virus sample while trying to escape. As Yoko's memories return, so does her awareness of how much she had seen before the outbreak began. Below Freezing Point sends the survivors into the same broad laboratory complex later associated with Birkin's work, placing Yoko inside facilities she recognizes before she can explain why. Computer systems respond to her. Monica knows her. The scenario keeps letting the shy student brush against evidence of an entirely different life. Yoko's larger inventory is another small character detail that became beloved in online play. She could carry more of the group's supplies, which made other players protective of her for reasons that were only partly noble. Losing Yoko could mean losing the ammunition, medicine, and key item everybody had handed her 10 minutes earlier. And Monica's plan ends exactly as well as plans involving stolen G-Virus usually do. She is implanted by a G-mutant, attempts to board the evacuation train, and dies when the creature erupts from her body. Yoko can make it farther. She can reach Raccoon University, face Thanatos, and escape with the others. Her ending suggests she survived carrying the burden of her restored memories. Then the most informed civilian in the cast disappears. Yoko could have identified personnel. She could have explained Umbrella procedures and laboratory layouts. Her testimony would have been useful in the investigations that followed the city's destruction. It would also have made her a target. Umbrella had already demonstrated what it did with employees who became inconvenient. There is a fan theory that Yoko's memory loss was deliberately caused to hide information or control her. The games establish the loss and her employment connection. Explanations often grow beyond the evidence. Outbreak is full of that kind of half-visible history. You get enough to understand the danger, then the door closes. If Yoko escaped with daylight, she would have both technical knowledge and a treatment. If she escaped without it, she still remembered the people beneath the university and the laboratory systems Umbrella tried to bury. Her strongest ending lets her survive. It doesn't tell us whether forgetting Umbrella was ever an option again. Alyssa Ashcroft. For more than 20 years, Alyssa Ashcroft looked like another Outbreak survivor stranded in optional canon. Then Resident Evil 7 placed her name inside the Baker house. You can find a newspaper article about missing people in Louisiana. The byline belongs to Alyssa. That tiny reference did something the old endings couldn't. It confirmed that she survived Raccoon City, continued working as a journalist, and was still investigating dangerous stories years later. For Outbreak fans, one byline was enough. Alyssa had always been the character most likely to drag Umbrella's secrets into daylight. She was an investigative reporter before the outbreak. Her scenarios connect her to the Raccoon Hospital, the university, and the wider cover-up. She can pick locks, uncover hidden paths, and push into rooms any sensible civilian would leave alone. Her personality is blunt, sometimes abrasive, and she keeps asking questions while the city is literally being erased around her. The RE7 article suggested Alyssa made a career out of surviving that instinct. Before Requiem, that was the perfect scale for an Outbreak confirmation. The article did not explain her whole escape or interrupt Ethan's story. It simply used Alyssa's profession correctly. Of course, the old reporter would still be following disappearances. Of course, her name would turn up on a clipping in a house where nobody had answered the telephone for years. It also made her one of very few Raccoon civilians with a fixed post-1998 date. Characters such as Leon and Claire became global protagonists. Alyssa remained a reporter long enough for her work to reach Louisiana. She survived the city's physical destruction and the long institutional effort to bury what happened there. Resident Evil Requiem finally went much further. The game establishes that Alyssa survived Raccoon City, later adopted Grace, and continued investigating Umbrella-related crimes. Grace is her daughter through adoption, a distinction worth keeping straight because the story uses their chosen family relationship deliberately. Alyssa's survival carried her into another murder investigation. Requiem uses that fact to bridge generations. Grace approaches danger differently. She is cautious where Alyssa pushed forward, shaped by losing the woman who chose to raise her. The old Outbreak skills and personality are no longer trivia. They explain why Alyssa entered Renwood and why her daughter has spent years living beside the unanswered case. There is something wonderfully specific about Capcom selecting her. Kevin had the badge, George had daylight, Yoko had Umbrella knowledge, Alyssa had a byline, and a modern horror game turned that byline into inheritance. 8 years before the events of Requiem, she was murdered at the Renwood Hotel. Grace lived with the consequences, and the case remained tangled with the same corporate legacy Alyssa had spent years pursuing. Capcom took a woman introduced as one of 8 playable civilians in an experimental online PlayStation 2 game and made her absence the foundation of a modern Resident Evil story. It is one of the most interesting returns in the series because Capcom fills the missing years before showing their cost. Her life continued. She became a mother. Her reporting mattered. Then somebody stopped her, and that changes how the other Outbreak endings feel. Alyssa is proof that Capcom can select one survivor, canonize the escape, and build decades of unseen life behind a forgotten name. Kevin might have a family. George might have practiced medicine. Cindy may have carried the memory of Jay's bar for the rest of her life. We just haven't received their byline yet. Alyssa also answers one smaller mystery from Resident Evil 7. That newspaper wasn't a random developer joke anymore. It was evidence. She had reached Louisiana through her work, close enough to the trail of disappearances surrounding Dolve to put her name on the story. There is a sad stubbornness to that. Raccoon City taught Alyssa exactly what happens to reporters who get near a bioweapons cover-up. She kept investigating them. Her final fate is now known. She escaped Raccoon, built a life with Grace, and was killed at Renwood. For years, she belonged on a list of missing characters. Today, she is the example that keeps the whole list open. Capcom remembered Alyssa after almost a quarter of a century. Any of the others could be next. Ark Thompson, Lott, and Lily Klein. Resident Evil Survivor opens with a man waking beside a burning helicopter and immediately deciding he must be an Umbrella commander named Vincent Goldman. The truth arrives later. His name is Ark Thompson. The playable character is Ark Thompson, a private investigator and friend of Leon Kennedy. Leon sent him to Bashina Island to investigate Umbrella's activities. The crash leaves Ark with amnesia, and several people on the island believe he is Vincent, so Ark spends a decent chunk of the game suspecting that he may be responsible for the nightmare around him. That nightmare includes a detail the series rarely lingers on. Umbrella built part of its Tyrant production around kidnapped teenagers. The victims were taken to the island, held in captivity, and used to extract a hormone needed for the mass production process. Lott and Lily Klein are children of Umbrella researcher Andy Klein. Their parents died during the outbreak, leaving the two of them alone inside a city full of mutants and company personnel trying to erase evidence. Ark eventually recovers the truth about his identity. Vincent is the administrator. Ark is the investigator who came to expose him. The confusion works because Vincent's record is appalling. He responded to resistance among the island's workers with mass punishment, oversaw the kidnapping operation, and treated the entire population as material for Tyrant production. People who find Ark after the crash recognize the man they think he is and react with terror or hatred. With no memory, Ark has to consider that their accusations might be true. Lott initially helps sustain the mistake. He repeats what adults on the island taught him and sees Vincent as an important authority figure. His movement through the disaster gradually strips away that inherited loyalty. By the time Ark reaches the children, getting them off Sheena Island is also a chance to remove them from the only version of Umbrella they had known. He finds Lott and Lily and gets them toward the evacuation route. Vincent pursues them, and the final escape turns into a series of Tyrant attacks, including the Hypnos model that keeps mutating after each defeat. Ark kills it aboard the helicopter and leaves Sheena Island with both children alive. 3 survivors, 1 helicopter, no follow-up. Ark should have been able to report directly to Leon. This happens before Leon's mission in Spain, and after Leon has already become involved with the United States government. Evidence from an Umbrella-controlled island using children for Tyrant production would be useful, to put it mildly. Lott and Lily have even more reason to matter. They grew up around Umbrella personnel. Lott initially believes the company line that the island's workers are more valuable than the imprisoned outsiders. The outbreak destroys that belief along with his family. Lily is younger and spends most of the game relying on her brother and Ark to get her out. Survivor ends before any of them process it. Leon sending Ark is a wonderfully underused detail. It means Leon was already building contacts capable of investigating Umbrella away from official missions. Ark is trusted enough to enter an isolated corporate city alone. If he returned with Lott and Lily, Leon would suddenly have a friend who had seen an industrial Tyrant line from the inside, and 2 child witnesses who could identify the people running it. The Hypnos project makes that evidence even stronger. It was designed through selective pressure, using repeated competition to produce a superior Tyrant candidate. Ark doesn't merely encounter one loose monster. He reaches the end of an organized program meant to make deployment more efficient. The game's reputation probably helped bury them. It was an early light gun style spin-off with awkward controls, first-person presentation, and a famously rough English dub, yet its events sit inside the main timeline, and later material acknowledges Sheena Island. Ark really did go there. The Tyrant program really did exist. Those children really did leave. There has never been a confirmed adult version of Lott or Lily. It doesn't rejoin Leon on screen. We don't know whether he remained an investigator, entered government protection, or decided that one island full of mass-produced tyrants was enough professional curiosity for a lifetime. I cannot blame him for the last one. The concrete answer is that Ark, Lott, and Lily escaped Sheena Island together. Their lives after the helicopter are unknown, and with them, Resident Evil's forgotten cast begins to spread beyond Raccoon City. The next survivor did get an ending, although her rescue placed a living virus under government control. Manuela Hidalgo. Manuela Hidalgo's blood catches fire when she fights. No weapon, no lighter. The blood leaves her body and ignites in the air because Manuela carries the T. Veronica virus, the same viral family responsible for Alexia Ashford's transformation. She is also only 15 during Operation Javier. Leon Kennedy and Jack Krauser encounter her in South America while investigating drug lord Javier Hidalgo. Villages have been hit by a viral outbreak. People are disappearing. Manuela seems to be a frightened captive who escaped Javier's compound, and her body is showing signs of a dangerous infection. Then Leon learns she is Javier's daughter. Manuela had a terminal illness. Javier refused to lose her, obtained T. Veronica, and infected her in an attempt to keep her alive. Controlling the virus required repeated organ transplants. Those organs came from girls kidnapped from the surrounding region. Manuela's survival was being purchased with other children's bodies, and Javier hid the source from her. Once she learns the truth, Manuela turns against him. Her reaction is painfully restrained at first. Manuela has spent years believing the procedures were necessary treatments arranged by a loving father. Finding rooms connected to the missing girls forces her to understand that every new organ in her body has a name Javier chose not to tell her. She carries their deaths before she ever decides to use the virus against him. Javier eventually merges with a massive infected plant and becomes V-Complex. During the fight, Manuela deliberately uses her burning blood to help Leon and Krauser. She can control the viral response for short periods, although every use risks accelerating the infection or damaging her body. The scene gives her powers an actual cost. She is burning through herself to stop her father. The ending depends on how quickly the player defeats Javier. In the intended successful route, Manuela remains alive. The United States government takes her into custody and places her under strict supervision. The slower alternate ending has the infection overwhelm her, and she dies, because later chronology follows Leon and Krauser beyond the operation without establishing Manuela's death. The survival ending is generally treated as the central outcome. Survival is doing uncomfortable work there. Government agents take Manuela into custody. Her father is dead. The girls used to sustain her are dead. Her blood contains a controllable T. Veronica infection. The same government that turned Leon into an agent now possesses a teenage biological asset, unlike anyone else in the series. And Krauser sees all of it. Operation Javier destroys Krauser's confidence in normal military power. His injured arm, his resentment toward Leon and the government's handling of the mission, feed the obsession that later takes him to Wesker and Los Iluminados. Manuela's mutation is part of the moment where Krauser decides human strength has limits he no longer accepts. So even without returning, she changes Resident Evil 4. Her own future receives nothing. No medical file confirms whether doctors stabilized the virus. No later agent mentions the girl whose blood combusted. Terrasave never appears to challenge her confinement. The government might call it quarantine, protective custody, or national security. Manuela would experience the same locked doors. This one has bothered me for years, because the ending creates a living person and immediately turns her into classified material. She helped stop Javier. She did everything Leon asked. Then officials took her away because her body was too valuable to release. The series later shows Sherry Birkin working as a government agent while carrying regenerative abilities from her G-virus infection. Manuela could have followed a similar path. She could also still be inside a facility, watched every day for changes. Nobody has confirmed either future. The files around Operation Javier offer no comfortable medical solution. Alexia achieved control over T. Veronica by spending 15 years in cryogenic sleep while the virus adapted. Javier attempted to manage Manuela's infection through surgery, drugs, and continued replacement. Once his organization collapses, American doctors inherit a patient whose stability depended on a criminal supply chain they cannot continue. That makes the surveillance understandable and still awful. If Manuela loses control, people could die. If she remains controlled, officials have every incentive to study how. Either way, the teenager who helped end the operation becomes its final living experiment. Manuela survived Javier. Whether she ever got to live outside government custody remains unanswered. Bruce McGivern and Fong Ling. Dead Aim begins on an Umbrella-owned ocean liner and ends beneath the sea with a satellite laser. This is why I love the spin-offs. Bruce McGivern is an American agent sent aboard the Spencer Rain after former Umbrella researcher Morpheus D. Duval steals viral material and takes the ship hostage. Fong Ling is a Chinese intelligence operative assigned to the same crisis. They meet by pointing guns at each other, spend most of the operation arguing about trust, and slowly realize that both governments see them as expendable pieces. Morpheus infects himself with the T+G virus, which combines traits from two of Umbrella's worst projects. His first major mutation produces a fast, electrically charged tyrant form. Later he becomes an enormous mass inside the underwater facility. Dead Aim is not subtle. Fong's superiors become a separate threat. Her government has placed a tracking device in her body and is prepared to destroy the entire target area with an orbital strike. Fong is still inside when the countdown begins. Bruce cuts the tracker out because, apparently, removing embedded government hardware during a bioweapon emergency is just another part of the mission. Fong's orders had already pushed her into conflict with Bruce. She's meant to secure Morpheus's missile launch data and protect her government's interests, even if that means using Bruce. When her own side targets her position, all of that professional distance collapses very quickly. The tracker proves she was never trusted with an exit. Bruce is hardly operating from a clean institution either. The United States wants the threat contained and the viral research recovered. He spends the game trading information with a voice-over radio, while Morpheus controls the ship. Their survival comes from choosing each other over the agencies directing them. They kill Morpheus, reach an escape craft, and survive the destruction of the facility. The exact flavor of their final exchange differs between localizations, which has fueled years of arguments over how romantic the ending is supposed to be. The useful canon point is much less exciting. Bruce and Fong leave together, alive. Neither returns. Bruce had direct experience with the T+G virus and another umbrella theft. Fong had just been targeted by her own government. Their partnership ended in the perfect position for a second story. 2 agents alive, their agencies compromised, and a whole lot of explaining to do. Instead, Dead Aim remained a one-off. Bruce occasionally appears in encyclopedia material and non-story content. Fong gets even less. Morpheus and the Spencer Reign rarely influence later plots, despite the scale of the incident. The entire case feels sealed inside the early 2000s era when Capcom would place one enormous bioterror disaster in a side game and assume everybody involved went home afterward. At least Bruce and Fong did go home, or reach some version of home after escaping their employers. They survived an infected cruise ship, an underwater laboratory, and a weapon firing from orbit. The paperwork may have finished them. The T+G virus does continue to linger as a concept fans remember. It gives Morpheus regeneration, tyrant-like power, and electromagnetic ability before his later mutation. A sample or complete research record escaping would have been a serious problem. Dead Aim presents Bruce and Fong stopping the immediate missile threat, though it never pauses for a detailed inventory of what their employers recovered from the wreckage. That is the maddening thing about this era of Resident Evil. Whole viral branches appear, produce a creature that can shrug off bullets through an electrical field and sync with one facility. Bruce and Fong know it happened. Everybody else behaves as if the case file was stamped and locked. Parker Luciani. Parker Luciani falls through fire from the Queen Zenobia and disappears into the ship. Resident Evil Revelations wants you to believe he is dead. Jill cannot reach him. The floor gives way. The entire vessel is close to destruction, and Parker has already been shot by Jessica. Then the ending reveals Raymond Vester pulled him out. Parker is found drifting near the coast of Malta and eventually returns to the BSAA. That survival is canon, even though the game has already moved its attention toward Chris, Jill, and the conspiracy around the Federal Bioterrorism Commission. His history covers the formation of the modern anti-bioterror world. During the Terra Grigia panic, Parker and Jessica work for the FBC under Morgan Lansdale. They fight through the solar-powered city while hunters pour across it, and they witness the organization's failure to contain the attack. Afterward, Parker leaves the FBC and joins the young BSAA. Parker also has history with Raymond from Terra Grigia, which complicates the rescue. Raymond behaves like a suspicious outsider aboard the Zenobia, and repeatedly provokes Parker's distrust. When he later carries the wounded Parker away, the act appears genuine, even though Raymond is still participating in the T-Abyss handoff. Saving an old colleague and completing a covert sale coexist in the same character. That probably leaves Parker with questions the ending never lets him ask. The man who saved him also helped ensure the virus left the ship. The woman who shot him once worked at his side. Returning to duty would mean accepting that both disappeared with their actual loyalties concealed. On the Zenobia, he discovers how deep the betrayal goes. Jessica is a double agent. Raymond appears to be one as well, then spends the ending passing a T-Abyss sample to her. Lansdale engineered the crisis to expand the FBC's power. Parker is surrounded by people running operations inside operations, and he is one of the few who seems genuinely focused on getting his team home, which is probably why his fake death lands. Once Raymond rescues him, Parker's future becomes quiet. He returns to service, although later mainline games do not show him beside the BSAA. The Heavenly Island manga places Parker in a later operation. That appearance belongs to licensed manga continuity, and should be labeled accordingly whenever it enters the discussion. The games themselves leave him alive and largely off-screen. There is a small irony here. Revelations introduces several agents who look temporary. Parker feels the most human and straightforward. He is the one character the story explicitly saves after pretending to kill him. And then Jessica, the person who shot him, carries a virus sample into the future while Parker receives no part in resolving it. He survived the Queen Zenobia, he returned to the BSAA. Whatever he learned about his colleagues apparently stayed there. Keith Lumley and Quint Sechem. Keith Lumley and Quint Sechem are introduced arguing about women, equipment, and who has to do the actual work. They are BSAA agents stationed in the snowy mountains near Valkoinen Mökki Airport. Their job is to search for information connected to Veltro. Quint handles technology, Keith handles combat. Neither handles silence particularly well. Quint is obsessed with gadgets and frequently more interested in his equipment than the danger around him. Keith calls himself Grinderman and tries to drag the assignment back toward action. Their scenes interrupt the claustrophobic Zenobia chapters with two men wandering through snow, complaining about the cold and making progress almost by accident. Then they discover that the Veltro revival is staged. The data helps expose how the signals are being manipulated and moves O'Brien's operation closer to Lansdale. Their contribution is easy to overlook because the story cuts away whenever they become useful. When they recover the data the BSAA needs, an airstrike hits the airfield. The blast swallows their position. The story moves on as if two more agents have joined Resident Evil's enormous pile of dead supporting teams. The ending montage brings Keith and Quint back alive. Keith apparently shielded Quint during the explosion, which means the two comic relief agents survived the dramatic missile strike while several, much more serious squads died. And good for them. They complete their assignment and make it out. No infection, no secret sample, no known betrayal. Later games simply never return to them. Keith and Quint may still be working somewhere in the BSAA, assuming the organization's retirement package hasn't improved enough to tempt them away. If they stayed, the BSAA's later corruption would put them in a strange position. Quint is exactly the person you would want examining an artificial soldier's hardware or tracing orders through a compromised network. Keith is exactly the person you would send to kick down the wrong door while Quint explains why it was technically the right one. No later roster confirms they remained. Their final status stays refreshingly uncomplicated, bruised, snow-covered, and alive enough to keep annoying each other. Their disappearance carries no grand tragedy. It is just one of those loose Resident Evil facts that makes you pause when another game introduces 12 new agents destined to die in a hallway. Keith and Quint are still available, Capcom. Clive O'Brien and Morgan Lansdale. Clive R. O'Brien creates an entire fake terrorist revival to expose his former boss. That sentence needs context. O'Brien leads the BSAA during Resident Evil Revelations. He knows FBC Commissioner Morgan Lansdale covered up the truth behind the Terra Grigia panic. Lansdale allowed the attack to happen, used it to justify expanding the FBC, and then destroyed evidence by directing the Regia Solis satellite weapon at the city. Proving it years later is difficult. Lansdale has institutional power, the FBC controls information, and the surviving leader of Veltro, Jack Norman, is trapped aboard the sunken Queen Dido with evidence nobody has recovered, so O'Brien stages signs that Veltro has returned. He sends BSAA teams toward the ghost ships, keeps parts of the operation hidden from Chris and Jill, and pushes the conspiracy into the open. It is risky, manipulative, and very Resident Evil. People nearly die because O'Brien decides the truth requires a live operation. Eventually, Chris and Jill reach Norman. After a final mutation and fight, Norman gives them the proof. Lansdale is exposed and arrested. The FBC is dissolved, while the BSAA rises into the position of international authority it holds in later games. Norman had been trapped with his followers for a year. Lansdale supplied Veltro with the T-Abyss virus, allowed the attack, and then erased the city to conceal the arrangement. When the FBC abandoned the terrorists aboard the Queen Dido, Norman kept the evidence on a PDA and kept himself alive long enough to use it. By the time Jill and Chris arrive, the virus has ravaged him. O'Brien's operation depends on reaching that one furious survivor before Lansdale destroys the remaining ships. It is an elaborate gamble made by a director who cannot use ordinary oversight because the agency being investigated controls the oversight. O'Brien resigns. The ending says he takes responsibility for his actions. He later writes a book about the case, giving the public some version of what happened. He remains alive and out of command. Lansdale also remains alive, as far as confirmed information goes, although his future points toward prison. The man responsible for Terra Grigia loses the institution he built and is taken into custody. Resident Evil never returns to his trial, sentence, or potential knowledge of other operations. There is a bigger legacy here. O'Brien's plan clears the way for the BSAA to become the world's dominant anti-bioterror force. Years later, Chris discovers that same BSAA using an artificial soldier during the Village operation. O'Brien left before that rot became visible. Maybe he saw an organization that could still be trusted. Maybe he watched its expansion from outside with increasing concern. We never hear his reaction. He exposed one corrupt commissioner, wrote down the story, and resigned. Morgan Lansdale stayed alive long enough to see the BSAA inherit almost everything he lost. O'Brien's book, The Unveiled Abyss, turns the operation into a public account. That is a rare follow-through in this franchise. Somebody survives a conspiracy and actually publishes. Whether the book contains the staged Veltro signals, the BSAA's deception, or every detail from the Queen Dido is unknown, but O'Brien attaches his name to the record instead of vanishing behind classification. He could still be consulted. He knows how quickly an anti-bioterror agency can use fear to expand its authority, because he watched Lansdale do exactly that. Chris could use that perspective now. The story has never put them back in the same room. Angela Miller and Rani Chawla. Rani Chawla is a child trapped inside a terminal while a biohazard spreads through Harvardville Airport. She has no combat training, no unusual immunity. Her aunt works for TerraSave, and Claire Redfield finds Rani during the evacuation. That is most of what Rani needs to become worth remembering. Resident Evil spends so much time around trained agents that an ordinary child getting home alive can feel unusual. Angela Miller is the local SRT officer who helps make that happen. Her brother Curtis has spent years demanding the truth about the destruction of Raccoon City, where their family died. Will Pharma buried information. Senator Ron Davis profited from corporate secrecy. Curtis eventually infects himself with the G-Virus, convinced that a spectacular attack is the only way to force the truth into public view. Angela has to confront what remains of him. The final fight inside Will Pharma's research facility places her beside Leon while Curtis mutates. Even through the infection, he retains enough recognition to hesitate around Angela. It doesn't save him. The facility collapses, Leon and Angela survive, and evidence emerges linking Tricell to the theft of viral material. Curtis's history makes Angela's survival less clean than the action ending suggests. He had already lost his wife and child in Raccoon City. His campaign for an investigation cost him public credibility, and Will Pharma's pressure helped isolate him. Angela understands why he wanted the truth. Then she watches that need become the opening Frederick Downing uses to turn him into a G-Virus weapon. Leon has lived a version of that history from the government side. Claire has lived it through activism. Angela stands between them as a local officer whose own family was consumed by the cover-up. Rani also survives the airport attack. She leaves with her aunt, having spent the day hiding from infected passengers and watching adults fail around her. Neither appears again. Rani's connection to Curtis adds another layer. Her aunt is a researcher, and Curtis saves Rani during the airport outbreak before his own infection drives the rest of the story. The man who becomes the monster is also one of the adults who gets the child out of immediate danger. Rani will grow up with that contradiction if anyone ever tells her the full sequence. Angela presumably returns to law enforcement in some form, although the film never confirms it. She has proof that corporate pressure can destroy a family long before a virus mutates anyone. I would take one scene of her meeting Claire again over another anonymous tactical briefing. Angela's future could easily have connected to later investigations. She lost Curtis, saw Will Pharma's research, and met Leon during the point where Tricell was moving toward its role in Resident Evil 5, yet the animated films moved on to new supporting casts. Rani going home is probably the better ending. She remains one of the children Claire actually rescued, free to grow up far from the next tactical unit, and sometimes a missing character is missing because the rescue worked. Buddy. Alexander Kozachenko spends most of Resident Evil, damnation known as Buddy. He is a school teacher turned rebel leader in the Eastern Slava Republic. Government forces killed the woman he loved. The Civil War swallowed his students and community. By the time Leon enters the country, Buddy is using Las Plagas to control lickers as living weapons. It works for a while. The rebels implant themselves with dominant Plaga and direct the creatures against President Svetlana Belikova's forces. Buddy knows the infection may eventually consume him. He keeps going because the conventional war has already taken almost everything else. His friend JD provides the human cost up close. JD is funny, loyal, and fascinated by American culture. He becomes infected during the fighting. Buddy has to watch the parasite take someone else while knowing he has already accepted the same mechanism inside himself. By the time he asks Leon to kill him, the request has been building through more than physical pain. Svetlana, meanwhile, uses the rebels' bioweapons to justify her own escalation. Her underground tyrants are state power given a pulse. When they activate, Buddy's controlled lickers are suddenly outmatched, and Leon is trapped between two sides that both decided monsters could solve politics. Leon tries to stop him. Ada investigates the Plaga supply. Svetlana reveals that she has her own bioweapon program beneath the capital, complete with tyrants. The conflict ends with Buddy and Leon fighting side by side against creatures large enough to make the lickers look manageable. Afterward, Buddy can feel the parasite taking control. He asks Leon to kill him. Leon raises the gun and shoots him through the spinal cord. The injury severs Buddy's ability to control the Plaga and leaves him paralyzed. It also keeps him alive. The epilogue shows him in a wheelchair, back in a classroom, teaching children again while the political situation begins to change around him. That ending is unusually specific. Buddy survives. He loses the use of his legs. He returns to teaching. Svetlana is forced from power after international intervention exposes the situation. She also survives, although the film doesn't spend time on her legal fate. Both leave the story alive on opposite sides of the same ruined country. Buddy has never returned. He doesn't need a miracle cure, and I hope the series never gives him one casually. The wheelchair is part of the cost of his survival and Leon's decision. A future appearance could show how he rebuilt his school or how Eastern Slav history remembers the rebels. For now, the final image does enough. Buddy asked Leon for death. Leon found the one shot that let him go home. The classroom scene doesn't pretend the country is repaired. Buddy is teaching from a wheelchair while news coverage suggests the political order around him is shifting. His students are alive. That is the scale the ending chooses. Leon leaves, knowing he disobeyed Buddy's request and permanently changed his body. Buddy appears to have accepted the life that remained. Neither gets a conversation about it, which may be why the scene works. Nadia and Maria Gomez. Nadia is the member of the Silver Dagger team with a rifle and a prosthetic leg. Maria Gomez is the daughter of the man helping unleash the A-virus on New York. One vanishes after surviving. The other waits 6 years for revenge. In Resident Evil Vendetta, Nadia joins Chris Redfield's operation against Glenn Arias. Her team is hit hard. Damien dies. DC is caught in the fighting. Nadia stays with the mission, provides sniper support, and survives the final attack in New York. Nadia is nearly killed when Arias' forces attack the BSAA vehicle. Her prosthetic leg and calm under fire are simply part of an experienced operator. She continues the mission after losing people she knows, takes a rooftop position, and helps cover the final confrontation. That gives her more established competence than plenty of agents who later receive repeat appearances. Yet Death Island reunites the franchise veterans without even a line about the surviving Silver Dagger member. The film ends without much attention on her. She is alive, wounded by what happened to her team, and still connected to Chris's anti-bioterror world. Death Island never brings her back. Maria does return. During Vendetta, her father Diego is mortally wounded and merged with Arias through the A-virus. Maria survives the final battle and disappears after the villains are defeated. Her escape is one of the movie's clear loose ends. Resident Evil. Death Island picks it up. Maria targets Leon and the other survivors involved in Arias' defeat, working beside Dylan Blake during the Alcatraz operation. She fights Leon in close quarters with an aggression that makes the grudge obvious. This is the same operative, now consumed by finishing what Vendetta started. Leon kills her during their final confrontation. Maria's return also confirms that the people behind one outbreak do not always disappear when the lead villain dies. Arias is gone. Diego is gone. The A-virus attack fails. Maria carries the grievance forward herself. She does not require another global conspiracy to motivate her. Leon took part in destroying the only family she had left. Death Island closes that branch decisively. Nadia's branch remains where Vendetta placed it, with a surviving operator and no announced assignment. So Maria's forgotten status now has an answer. She survived New York, pursued revenge, and died on Alcatraz. Nadia's remains open. She survived the same film and has not received another confirmed mission. It is a neat example of how Resident Evil treats loose ends. A villain can wait in storage until a sequel needs motive. A surviving squad member may simply remain at work somewhere beyond the camera. Wilson. Secretary of Defense Wilson spends Resident Evil, Infinite Darkness, covering up the Panam Stan incident and building a private bioweapons market. Jason ends his plan by biting him. Wilson had manipulated soldiers, suppressed the truth, and used infected victims as controlled assets through an inhibitor that prevented the virus from progressing. Jason and Shen-Mei both wanted the conspiracy exposed, although Jason's methods eventually turned toward mass terror. Their paths end in the underground facility beneath Washington, where Wilson's secrets physically rise into view. The Mad Dogs unit had been sent into Panam Stan and infected during a mission Wilson helped engineer. The inhibitor kept the soldiers human enough to use and desperate enough to control. Jason wanted the public to experience fear, on a scale that would make the hidden war impossible to ignore. Shen-Mei wanted evidence capable of exposing it without unleashing another attack. Wilson needed both of them silent. His plan treats infection as a subscription service. Create the dependency, control the supply, then sell the model to people who want obedient soldiers. During the chaos, the infected Jason attacks Wilson. Wilson survives the facility, although the bite leaves him infected and dependent on the same inhibitor used to control the soldiers he exploited. The final scene shows him meeting a Tricell executive. She offers the drug. Wilson's hand is already showing signs of the infection. His continued life now depends on a pharmaceutical supply controlled by somebody else. That is his last confirmed status. People sometimes remember Wilson as dead, because most of Infinite Darkness's conspirators do not leave in good condition. He is alive when the story ends. Sick, compromised, and likely still dangerous, but alive. The Tricell connection places the scene before the company's collapse in Resident Evil 5. It suggests Wilson's knowledge and network could have moved into that organization. The show never confirms how long the inhibitor worked, whether he transformed later or whether Tricell removed him once he stopped being useful. Claire knows enough to keep pursuing the Panam Stan truth. Leon withholds the chip from her because releasing it could create wider instability. Their disagreement becomes the emotional ending, while Wilson quietly enters another arrangement. And then the series jumps ahead. Wilson may have died when Tricell fell. He may have been arrested. He could have spent years taking regular doses while selling weapons through intermediaries. The last image gives him time without giving him freedom. Infinite Darkness takes place in 2006, leaving several years before Tricell's public collapse. That is plenty of time for Wilson to exchange information, money, or access for continued doses. His government position in Panam Stan network would be useful to a company already placing agents around viral incidents. The series has never identified him among Tricell's later casualties. His infection could progress if the doses stop. Until a file says it did, Wilson remains one of the rare antagonists last seen negotiating while the virus visibly claims his hand. For once, the man who put infected soldiers on a chemical leash ended up wearing one himself, Steve Burnside. Steve Burnside has been possibly coming back for more than 2 decades. The reason is one line from Albert Wesker. Before that line, Steve's story is fairly final. He is imprisoned on Rockford Island with his father after his father's attempt to sell Umbrella information destroys the family. Steve resents both parents, performs confidence whenever Claire is nearby, and makes a lot of decisions that remind you he is still 17. He also saves Claire repeatedly. When the outbreak spreads through the island, Steve fights beside her. He is forced to shoot his infected father. He follows Claire to Antarctica and becomes another test subject in Alexia Ashford's T. Veronica experiments. The virus transforms him into a huge creature carrying an axe. Alexia orders him to kill Claire. He chases her, strikes at her, and then resists the command at the last moment when a tentacle attacks. Steve turns on Alexia's organism and protects Claire. The effort changes him back briefly. He tells Claire he loves her, then he dies. Later, Wesker reveals that his forces recovered Steve's body and that the T. Veronica virus can be extracted from it. He taunts Claire with the possibility that Steve might return, pointing to the Ashfords as his example of resurrection in this universe. The line is cruel because Claire has no power to verify it. She has just escaped Antarctica, lost Steve, and found Chris. Wesker turns the body into leverage for a future encounter, then leaves with exactly the information needed to keep Claire wondering. From Wesker's perspective, Steve is research material. The virus inside him has already demonstrated rapid mutation, enormous physical strength, and an ability to recede far enough for Steve's human mind to surface. Any organization studying T. Veronica would value that outcome even if it had no interest in reviving the boy. Fans have held on to that possibility ever since. There is an important limit. Wesker recovered a corpse. No canonical story shows Steve conscious after Antarctica. Wesker wanted the virus, and Steve's body was the container. Resident Evil has brought dead people back through clones, parasites, mold memories, and engineered bodies, so the door can never be sealed completely. Darkside Chronicles retells the events and expands his relationship with Claire. It doesn't continue them. Later games mention T. Veronica through Operation Javier and other viral research. None identifies a living Steve inside that chain. And honestly, the long gap changes what a return would mean. Claire has lived through years of work with TerraSave. Wesker is dead. Umbrella is gone. Steve would either wake inside a world that moved on without him, or emerge as a biological copy built by somebody who never knew him. That could be a story. It has not happened. Steve died saving Claire. Wesker stole his body. Every claim after that remains a possibility attached to a corpse in storage. The later spread of T. Veronica proves Wesker's recovery mattered at the biological level. A version of the virus reaches Javier's operation. Research derived from the Ashford work continues. Steve himself never appears inside those stories. The franchise uses what was in his body and leaves the person behind. That is a much colder fate than the common Steve is alive somewhere theory. His cells may have influenced later weapons, while Claire never even learned where his remains were taken. Nikolai Genevieve. Ask whether Nikolai Genevieve survived Raccoon City, and you will get different answers depending on which Resident Evil 3 somebody means. The original game branches. Nikolai can be remarkably open about his motive once Jill catches on. Umbrella's supervisors are paid according to the quality of their combat observations, and dead colleagues mean fewer people sharing the reward. He murders fellow supervisor Terrell Patrick in one route, destroys evidence, and follows Jill's encounters with Nemesis like a man auditing an experiment. His survival route fits that personality. He steals a helicopter and leaves before the city is sterilized. There is no loyalty to Umbrella in the act. Nikolai is loyal to the value of the data and to himself. Nikolai is a UBCS supervisor secretly gathering combat data and eliminating other supervisors so he can increase his payment. Depending on player choices, he can be killed by Nemesis, confronted in a helicopter, or allowed to escape. Later material connected to Resident Evil Survivor includes a file credited to Nikolai after the raccoon incident, supporting the original timeline where he made it out, so the classic version has a credible survival route. He leaves other mercenaries to die, carries data from the city, and remains available to whoever pays next. The remake rewrites his final moments. It also changes Tyrell's role, gives Nikolai direct involvement in destroying the vaccine, and leaves his buyer unnamed. That unknown client is important. Umbrella is already collapsing under the consequences of Raccoon City, and somebody else wants combat footage, vaccine failure, and samples from the disaster. Nikolai is preparing for the market that replaces the company. Remake Nikolai works for an unknown client, sabotages the vaccine, and records combat data while Raccoon City collapses. Jill fights him at the helipad. Carlos restrains him. Their escape helicopter cannot carry everybody, and Jill leaves Nikolai wounded on the ground while the sterilization missile approaches. She asks who hired him. He offers to tell her if she takes him along. Jill refuses. The helicopter leaves. The blast consumes the city. No body is shown. There is also no believable conventional escape route left in the time available. Calling him definitely alive in the remake goes beyond the ending. Calling him absolutely confirmed dead adds a certainty Capcom avoided by cutting away. That gives Nikolai two useful answers. Original continuity supports his survival through a later document. Remake continuity leaves him behind at ground zero, presumed dead unless a future story explains something outrageous. Outrageous is possible here. This franchise once had Wesker run up a wall after being impaled by a tyrant. Still, Nikolai's survival should remain tied to the version being discussed. Mixing the original file with the remake helipad creates a third timeline that no game presents. Classic Nikolai likely escaped. Remake. Nikolai watched Jill take the last helicopter. If Capcom ever returns to him, the version will determine the entire story. An older classic Nikolai could have decades of mercenary work behind him. A remake Nikolai would need to explain how a wounded man outran a strategic missile from an exposed helipad. I am open to hearing that explanation. It had better be incredible. Moira Burton. Moira Burton hates guns because she fired one as a child and nearly killed her younger sister. Barry blames her. Moira blames herself. By the time Revelations 2 begins, that one accident has calcified into years of anger between them. Then Moira is abducted while working with TerraSave and dropped onto Sushestvovani Island with Claire Redfield. The Overseer fits both women with bracelets that monitor fear. The island's afflicted respond to pain and violence. Claire carries the firearms. Moira carries a flashlight and a crowbar, refusing to touch a gun even when that choice makes survival harder. Their partnership is shaped by the thing Moira cannot make herself do. Eventually, the tower collapses and the story splits according to one player action. During the confrontation with Neil Fisher, Claire becomes trapped. A gun lies near Moira. If the player makes Moira pick it up and fire, she pushes through the trauma that has controlled her since childhood. That decision leads toward the good ending. If Claire fires instead, Moira never reaches the same turning point, and the later events change drastically. In the continuing good route, the tower collapse separates Moira from Claire. Claire believes she died. That belief follows Claire out of the operation. She returns without Barry's daughter and has to tell him the island collapsed beneath them. Barry then spends the 6-month gap chasing a signal and carrying the possibility that Moira died after their last years together were defined by blame. Revelations 2 doesn't overplay the conversation, but you can feel it in how he responds to every trace of her. Moira's survival also happens without the equipment Claire relied on. She is stranded in a contaminated landscape after the main evacuation window closes. Evgeny offers shelter, then expects her to contribute. 6 months of food, cold, and hunting turn the impulsive TerraSave worker into the person who later walks into Alex's final battle on her own feet. Moira survives underground. Evgeny Rebic finds her and gives her shelter. For 6 months, she lives on the island beside an old man who distrusts outsiders, learning to hunt and endure while Barry arrives searching for her. Revelations 2 initially keeps this hidden. We follow Barry believing his daughter may already be gone. Then Moira walks back into the story carrying a gun. During the final battle, she saves Barry. It pays off her childhood accident, the Neil choice, and every argument about whether Barry's daughter can look after herself. Moira returns to Claire and her family. Later material connects her continued life to TerraSave work, giving her an actual direction beyond the island. The bad route deserves a boundary. If Moira fails to confront the gun trauma during Neil's fight, she does not reappear in the same way, and the ending becomes much darker. Revelations 2 uses those outcomes as branching conclusions. The good ending supplies the continuation. Most later discussion treats as the surviving route. There is a mechanic doing narrative work here. The player controlling Moira has to choose the gun. Claire cannot solve that moment for her. Barry cannot arrive early and apologize. A single input decides whether the family gets the reunion, and the game remembers it across episodes. Moira's case is satisfying because Capcom did answer it within the game. She was missing for 6 months, then we saw where she went, who kept her alive, and how she returned. What remains unknown is her later place in the Burton family and her work with TerraSave. The good ending earns that open future. Moira comes home with her father finally understanding the person she became without him. Evgeny Rebic. Evgeny Rebic could have left Sushestvovani Island. He chose the grave he had already dug. Evgeny survives the island's collapse by living beneath it, hunting animals and avoiding the afflicted. He distrusts Moira when he finds her. She is loud, injured, and connected to the people who brought disaster to his home. Eventually, he gives her shelter anyway. Their 6 months together are told through the struggle A side episode built around limited food and endurance. Moira learns to hunt. Evgeny keeps insisting that his daughter Irina may still be alive. That hope holds him to the island longer than any practical reason could. Irina is dead. Moira finds her letter and learns the truth. Evgeny is already sick. When rescue becomes possible, he stays behind, sits near the grave he prepared, and lets Moira go without him. There is no sudden mutation, no last boss fight. He dies as an old man who has lost his home and his child. Moira carries what he taught her into the final rescue. Barry never gets to thank him. Claire never meets him. The wider world never learns that a stubborn old survivor kept Barry Burton's daughter alive for half a year. Evgeny wasn't forgotten by the people inside his story. Moira remembers him. That is enough. Zoe Baker. The first time Resident Evil 7 ends, Zoe Baker appears to die because Ethan chose Mia. He uses the final serum on the woman he came to Louisiana to rescue. Eveline calcifies Zoe's body, and the story leaves her standing like a pale statue near the wrecked boat. It is abrupt. After hours of Zoe guiding Ethan by telephone, assembling serum ingredients, and trying to escape her infected family, she is apparently discarded by the canon choice. End of Zoe goes back for her. Zoe is still alive beneath the calcification. Blue Umbrella personnel locate her in the swamp, and her uncle Joe Baker finds the operation while searching for his family. Joe doesn't trust the soldiers. He also doesn't need many weapons. He punches molded creatures with his bare hands, eats bugs, straps scrap to his arms, and carries Zoe through some of the most wonderfully ridiculous combat Resident Evil has ever treated sincerely. The cure exists, but getting it to Zoe means surviving one final version of Jack Baker. Joe defeats his infected brother and administers the treatment. Zoe wakes. Chris Redfield contacts her and confirms that Ethan kept his promise to send help. She lives. The cure does more than reverse a visual effect. Zoe had been infected since Eveline took control of the Baker family in 2014. She resisted enough to contact outsiders, avoid becoming one of Jack's dinner table prisoners, and work toward a serum using the D-Series remains. For 3 years, every plan failed or ended with another captive dead. Ethan is the first person who reaches the boathouse with a usable dose. Then the cannon route gives that dose to Mia. Zoe's anger in the moment is earned. She helped Ethan navigate the house and never hid why she was doing it. End of Zoe finally acknowledges that debt and rescues her from the player's required choice. The post-incident material goes further. Zoe receives a new identity and protection. After the government and Blue Umbrella contain the Baker estate, she eventually works with a reporter in New Orleans and investigates the official cover story surrounding the incident. The Baker incident report gives her a way to record what happened after authorities attributed the deaths and destruction to a gas leak. That choice feels completely in character. Zoe spent 3 years trapped inside her own home, fully aware that people were disappearing and unable to reach anyone who could help. Once she is free, she starts assembling the truth. Her later status is alive, protected, at least in theory, still asking questions. There is a nice thread between Zoe and Alyssa Ashcroft here. Alyssa's reporting placed her near the disappearances in Dulvey. Zoe later works around the cover-up those disappearances became. The series hasn't confirmed that they met or exchanged information, and it would be too easy to invent that connection. Their work occupies neighboring pieces of the same buried story. Zoe also carries knowledge very few survivors possess. She knew Eveline's behavior from inside the family. She saw Mia under the mold's control. She understands how long the Connections operation remained hidden in rural Louisiana. If investigators ever fully expose that network, Zoe is a living witness. And unlike several people on this list, she received an ending designed specifically to rescue her from an unfair one. Ethan chose Mia. Joe chose Zoe. The Baker family lost almost everything, but one daughter walked away and wrote the incident down. Her report also gives Resident Evil a witness outside Chris's chain of command. Blue Umbrella can classify the operation. The government can maintain the gas leak story. Zoe lived in the house before either organization arrived, and she knows which names belong in the blank spaces. Joe Baker. Joe Baker sees a molded creature, raises his fists, and decides this is now the creature's problem. He lives in the swamps away from Jack's house. That isolation protects him from Eveline's control, although it also means he misses most of what happens to his brother's family. When Blue Umbrella arrives after the incident, Joe finds armed strangers and assumes they caused it. Reasonable. The Umbrella logo has earned that reaction. Joe searches for Zoe while fighting through the quarantine zone. He eats whatever restores health, including things Ethan would probably have left on the ground. He steals an advanced gauntlet from Blue Umbrella and uses it to punch through Stronger Molded. Then he faces the Swamp Man, the final infected form of Jack Baker. Joe kills his own brother and reaches Zoe with the cure. After she wakes, Chris explains the rescue operation. Joe survives the extraction. His confirmed story ends there. He presumably leaves the contaminated swamp, although End of Zoe does not map out where a man who lived off-grid goes after his home becomes a classified quarantine zone. Blue Umbrella owes him several explanations and probably a replacement pair of gloves. Joe remains alive. He saved Zoe. He has not been seen since. And if Capcom ever needs a 70-year-old man to punch a new bioweapon through a wall, they know where to look: Clancy Jarvis. Clancy Jarvis survives more playable Resident Evil 7 scenarios than almost anybody, and none of those victories save him. He is the cameraman for Sewer Gators, the paranormal web show that enters the abandoned Baker house before Ethan arrives. Producer Andre Stickland wants footage. Presenter Peter Walken wants an episode. Clancy wants to do his job and get out. Andre is killed in the guest house. Peter is attacked after the videotape footage ends. Clancy is captured alive by Lucas Baker. That is where his terrible little timeline begins. In bedroom, Marguerite keeps Clancy restrained and brings him food that should probably qualify as a boss enemy by itself. He searches the room whenever she leaves, solves mechanisms, hides the evidence, and eventually escapes the bedroom. It is tense because success only moves him into another part of the house. The room tells you how long Lucas and Marguerite have been doing this. Locks have been adapted into games. Trays, paintings, and clock mechanisms become tests. Clancy isn't escaping an improvised kidnapping. He is moving through routines the Bakers have built around keeping victims alive long enough to entertain them. In 21, Lucas forces Clancy into a card game against another captive named Hoffman. Losing means fingers, electricity, and eventually death. Clancy can beat the game. Lucas changes the rules. Hoffman is killed and Clancy remains trapped. Then comes Happy Birthday. Lucas puts him inside an escape room with a candle, a cake, and a series of traps. Clancy solves them. The cake explodes anyway. Fuel spreads across the room. The door locks. Clancy burns to death. Ethan later watches the recording and uses Clancy's experience to beat a modified version of the same trap. Clancy's death becomes the clue that saves somebody else. Lucas even changes the room after Clancy exposes its sequence. Ethan can remove the winding key before lighting the cake, preventing the oil from spraying across the floor. That solution only exists because the tape shows exactly where Clancy died. The cameraman is still doing his job at the end, recording evidence for whoever finds the footage. The order is generally understood as the guest house recording, bedroom 21, and Happy Birthday. Separate playable outcomes can look like escapes, particularly when a mode rewards the player for winning. The fixed story still ends, with Clancy's burned body inside Lucas's room. He never leaves the Baker estate. The official cover-up reduces the entire incident to a gas leak and associated deaths. The outside world probably remembers Clancy as a missing cameraman who went somewhere he shouldn't. There is no ambiguous helicopter, no unknown employer. Lucas recorded the ending. Clancy won every challenge he could control. Lucas owned the room. The Merchant. The Merchant is standing inside Los Illuminados territory with enough weapons to invade a small country. Nobody asks how he got them there. He appears across the village, castle and island, opens his coat and sells Leon firearms, upgrades, and healing items while cultists search every corridor. In the original Resident Evil 4, his eyes glow at night, a visual detail often linked to Plaga infection. Leon can shoot him, and on some difficulties that Merchant remains gone from the location. Another identical Merchant will still appear elsewhere. The remake turns him into more of a traveling quartermaster. He posts requests, trades spinels, maintains shooting ranges, and comments on Leon's progress. He knows where dangerous targets are. He gets ahead of Leon through routes we never see. Near the end, he is still operating on the island while Sadler's entire organization collapses. The requests make his information network even stranger. He knows about rats in abandoned sections, rare animals, defaced cult symbols, and powerful infected creatures that Leon has not encountered. Somebody is observing the region closely enough to turn its problems into a notice board. The merchant pays Leon to clear them, then converts the rewards into upgrades that make the cult easier to destroy. He also refuses to become a rescue objective. Ashley never asks who the enormous stranger is. Ada passes through the same territory without clarifying whether she uses his services. Sadler, who can sense Plaga hosts, never marches into the purple-lit shop and demands an explanation. Then Leon escapes. The merchant's extraction is never shown. Maybe he has a boat. Maybe there are several merchants. Maybe he belongs to a group that profited from arming anyone willing to fight the cult. The glowing eyes invite theories about a controlled Plaga, while his freedom of movement suggests Los Illuminados tolerated him or failed spectacularly to notice the largest coat in Spain. None of those explanations is confirmed. The remake adds a line from the Duke in Village, implying familiarity with the phrase, "What are you buying?" It is a lovely reference and possible suggestion that these traders know of each other. It does not establish a secret merchant guild, however much I would play that game. The original merchant's red eyes remain the strongest biological clue. Ganados also show visible ocular changes, and the merchant appears only inside the infected region. He never attacks Leon under Sadler's command. A Plaga host retaining independence would make him unusual, which is exactly why the game probably enjoys leaving the detail unexplained. Even his survival is phrased carefully. He's alive at his last encounter. The island explodes after Leon and Ashley leave. We don't see the merchant caught in it, and the game never shows him aboard their jet ski. His identity, biology, and route off the island remain blank. For all we know, he was already packing up before Leon bought the final rocket launcher. Business had clearly peaked. Jake Muller. Jake Muller begins Resident Evil 6 demanding $50 million for his blood. He ends it protecting a child for $50. That is the last thing we know about Albert Wesker's son. Jake grew up in Edonia with his mother and never really knew his father. He became a mercenary, fought for money, and developed the kind of emotional armor you would expect from someone who learned early that every organization eventually wants to use him. Then a C-virus attack tears through his unit. Other mercenaries inject themselves and mutate. Jake doesn't. His body carries antibodies. Sherry Birkin arrives under orders from National Security Advisor Derek Simmons. She tells Jake his blood could help create a vaccine for the C-virus. Jake immediately names his price, $50 million. Sherry agrees because the alternative is a global outbreak and because Sherry understands better than almost anyone what it means when the government wants something inside your body. That parallel does a lot of work. Sherry carries the lasting effects of G-virus infection. Jake carries Wesker's biology. Both spent childhood under the shadow of a father tied to a catastrophic virus. Both survived because their bodies changed in ways governments found valuable. Their mission goes badly almost at once. Jake's immunity doesn't make him invulnerable. The C-virus fails to transform him in the usual way, but the people hunting him can still imprison, injure, and dissect him if given enough time. Neo Umbrella keeps Jake and Sherry in separate cells and studies his body for months. The experience confirms every cynical belief he had about being useful to powerful people. Sherry is the reason he doesn't stay inside that cynicism. She has already spent years under government supervision because of her infection. She still believes saving strangers is worth the personal cost. Jake watches someone with an even stronger reason to resent the system keep choosing to help. The Ostanak hunts Jake across Edonia. He and Sherry are captured and held in a Neo Umbrella facility in China for 6 months. Tests are performed. Jake learns the identity of his father from Chris Redfield, the man who killed Wesker. Jake nearly attacks him. Then Chris accepts responsibility and doesn't defend what happened. Jake lowers the weapon. He has no love for Wesker, only anger at discovering that the absent father he built questions around was one of the most destructive men alive. By the final operation, Jake and Sherry escape the underwater facility, kill the Ustanak, and provide the blood needed for the vaccine. Jake receives his payment. The central crisis ends. His epilogue takes place somewhere else entirely. The location is unnamed, and the creature attacking the settlement is not used to set up a specific known outbreak. That vagueness helps. Jake can be anywhere bioweapons have reached, which by 2013 means almost anywhere. He travels light, keeps the hood up, and makes himself useful without joining a uniformed organization. A child approaches him for help against a BOW. Jake asks what the child can pay. The child holds up a small amount. Jake takes one coin. or accepts the tiny fee, depending on how you read the exchange, and goes to fight. The on-screen figure drops from $50 million to $50. It is a compact ending for his character. Jake rejects Wesker's legacy and leaves the $50 million mercenary behind. He uses his strength to protect someone who has almost nothing. And then he vanishes for more than a decade. Jake is alive. He is apparently working independently. His blood helped stop the C-virus pandemic. Sherry knows him, Chris knows him, and powerful organizations know exactly how valuable his biology is. Any remaining Neo Umbrella personnel, black market buyer, or government program could have reasons to find him. He also carries the name Problem. The public may never learn he is Wesker's son, but the people inside the bioterror world do. Resident Evil has repeatedly treated bloodlines as research material. Jake's resistance is unique enough to trigger an international operation in RE6. Fans debate whether bringing him back would drag the series toward the huge action scale of that game. Fair concern. Jake can punch a giant creature with his bare hands and survive events that make Leon's worst day look relatively organized. Yet the epilogue points toward a smaller version of him. One traveler, one child, one local monster. There is a good game sitting there. For now, Jake's fate is one of the clearer unknowns. He survived. He rejected his father's path. He lowered the price. Where he went after accepting that final job is still completely open. Jessica Sherrowat and Raymond Vester. Jessica Sherrowat leaves Resident Evil Revelations with a vial of T-Abyss virus and a smile. That vial may be more important than her entire BSAA career. Jessica first appears as Chris Redfield's new partner. She is flirtatious, dismissive of Jill, and apparently committed to the BSAA mission. Flashbacks place her beside Parker during the Terra Grigia panic, when both served with the FBC. They survived that disaster together. Parker trusts her. He shouldn't. On the Queen Zenobia, Jessica sabotages the ship's systems and tries to destroy the evidence connecting Lansdale to the Veltro attack. Parker catches her. She shoots him. For a moment, the game frames her as the obvious traitor and Raymond as the agent trying to expose her. Raymond later saves Parker's life. Then the cafe scene happens. Jessica meets Raymond after the operation. They speak like partners completing a job. Raymond hands her a container holding a T-Abyss sample recovered from the Queen Zenobia. Jessica asks whether he is all right after being shot, another staged injury inside an operation full of fake deaths. She takes the sample and leaves. The disguise is thorough enough to fool almost everyone around them. Jessica joins the BSAA, becomes Chris's partner, and enters an active operation with access to communications and weapons. Raymond performs hostility toward her while feeding selected information to Parker. Their apparent conflict gives both agents cover. Even the shot Raymond takes fits the performance until the cafe scene reframes how much was coordinated. Parker is the person left outside the joke. Jessica uses their old trust to get close enough to shoot him. Raymond saves him, although he never tells Parker the truth about the sample. The two agents preserve Parker's life and still complete the betrayal around him. The ending keeps their true employer unnamed. Tricell is an obvious suspect because of the period, the company's appetite for viral research, and Jessica's wider associations. A confirmed delivery to Tricell has never appeared, and the buyer remains open. The sample itself has horrifying potential. T-Abyss was created by combining the Abyss virus with elements of the T-virus. Infected humans mutate around an aquatic theme, producing ooze and other creatures capable of thriving in maritime environments. The Queen Zenobia outbreak shows how quickly one enclosed ship can become a floating laboratory of distorted bodies. The virus also creates Skagdead when certain hosts retain enough awareness to speak while mutating. Communications officer Rachel Foley continues hunting through the ship after infection. Norman becomes the ultimate Abyss after a year of exposure and isolation. These aren't clean laboratory demonstrations. Jessica's vial contains research drawn from a catastrophe that kept changing its victims. Veltro had enough of the virus to threaten the world's oceans. Jessica walks away with it in one hand, and no later mainline game gives us the delivery. Jessica is active at the last moment. She has an employer, a partner, a sample, and a completed infiltration. Her ending is structured as a sequel hook with every piece already moving. The sequel never came. Revelations 2 moves to a different virus and a different cast. The numbered games follow C-virus attacks, the mold, and the megamycete. T-Abyss continues in modes inside material, although its black market destination remains unresolved in the primary story. Raymond's loyalty is equally unclear. He He works within the FBC, opposes Lansdale, coordinates with Jessica, and saves Parker. Those actions do not line up under one simple allegiance. He may care about Parker and still sell a virus. Resident Evil agents contain multitudes, apparently. Jessica could be dead by now. Her buyer may have lost the sample. A lab could have spent years developing it. We have no confirmed consequence. That uncertainty creates one of the cleanest loaded guns in the franchise. Capcom already filmed the handoff. The sample, carrier, and buyer can continue from that exact table. All a future story has to do is tell us who paid the Duke. Ethan Winters has his heart ripped out by Miranda. He collapses in the snow. The Duke finds him, puts him in the wagon, and drives him toward the ceremony site. Ethan asks who the Duke really is. The Duke says he cannot quite answer that himself. Fair enough. Resident Evil Village introduces him as a merchant, although he is woven much more directly into the world than the traitor from Resident Evil 4. He knows the Four Lords. He understands the village's treasures. He cooks meals using ingredients Ethan brings him. He can somehow set up shop inside Castle Dimitrescu, Heisenberg's factory, and other places where a man of his size should be difficult to miss. He also knows about Rose. When Ethan brings the flasks, the Duke understands the ritual objects and directs him toward the altar. He never pretends the contents are ordinary. He speaks to Ethan with a strange mixture of sympathy and commerce, taking payment one minute and explaining how to rebuild the remains of a stolen child the next. No other villager occupies that position, between Miranda's private knowledge and Ethan's desperate search. The Duke guides Ethan toward each flask containing part of his daughter and reassembles them into the giant's chalice. He buys valuables taken from the lords. He keeps enough information back to remain unsettling, yet every direct action helps Ethan continue. His wagon ride after Miranda's attack is the clearest example. Ethan is already dying. The Duke could leave. Instead, he carries Ethan for the final distance and lets him choose where to stop. After that, the village is destroyed by the explosion beneath the Megamai seat. The Duke had already demonstrated that the wagon can reach places blocked to almost everyone else. His horses and supplies move, while bridges collapse and factories lock down. If anybody recognized the countdown around the ceremony site, it was probably him. Still, the final route is absent. We don't know which road remained open or how far he needed to travel before the detonation. The Duke's escape is never shown. His final main story appearance has him alive in the wagon before Ethan walks toward Miranda. It is reasonable to think he drove away. Saying we watched him clear the blast would be inaccurate. Shadows of Rose includes a hostile figure called the Masked Duke inside the consciousness connected to the Megamai seat. That creature is constructed within the realm Rose explores. The real Duke's fate remains separate and unresolved. The DLC plays with stored memories and identities and gives us no travel update from the original merchant. Fans have proposed that the Duke is a mutant, a former lord, a member of a merchant network or something created by the village's fungal history. His unusual size and knowledge make all of those theories fun. The game confirms none. So what happened to him? He was alive when Ethan left his wagon. He presumably had the means to travel. He knew the village was ending. Then the road disappears behind him. Maybe he is trading somewhere else. Maybe the blast took him. If he returns, I expect him to act mildly surprised that anybody worried. Mia Winters. Mia Winters is alive after Resident Evil Village. That answer is clear. The circumstances around it remain a blank. Before Louisiana, Mia works as a handler for the Connections. She travels aboard the Annabelle with Eveline, presenting herself as the child's mother while helping transport a human bioweapon. When the operation collapses, Mia records a warning for Ethan and ends up trapped under Eveline's influence at the Baker estate for years. Ethan finds her. The canon choice cures Mia. Chris Redfield's team extracts them, and the Winters family enters a protected relocation program. Then Mother Miranda finds them. Miranda kills and impersonates Mia, living inside the Winters home closely enough to fool Ethan. The real Mia is taken to a laboratory in Eastern Europe where Miranda keeps her alive and studies her. Chris rescues Mia during the village operation. She tells him the crucial fact his team failed to understand. Ethan has been sustained by the mold since Jack Baker killed him in Louisiana. Chris takes Mia away while Ethan stays behind to destroy the Megamai seat. Their last exchange is panicked and unfinished. Mia tries to explain that Ethan is special. Chris realizes too late what she means. He has already moved Ethan toward the center of the operation while keeping both Winters adults uninformed about his plan. By the time Mia is in the aircraft, her husband is walking back into the village with a body that is literally breaking apart. Rose is still an infant. Mia leaves the operation as a widowed mother, former Connections operative, and surviving prisoner of Miranda. Any one of those facts could determine what happens next. The games skip across all of them. Years later, Shadows of Rose shows their daughter living under government supervision. Rose visits Ethan's grave. Chris is still involved in her life. Mia is absent. The story does not give a confirmed location or a clean reason. That absence attracts aggressive theories. Mia may be in prison for her work with the Connections. She may have lost custody. She may be hiding, dead, working under another identity, or deliberately kept away from Rose. Each theory starts with a real gap and then fills it with assumptions. What we can say is narrower. Mia survived the village operation and was extracted by Chris's team. By the period shown in Shadows of Rose, Rose has grown up separated from her, or at least without Mia visibly present in the life the DLC shows. The circumstances remain unknown. It is a major loose end because Mia knows far more than the average survivor. She worked for the Connections. She knew Eveline before the shipwreck. She survived prolonged mold control. Miranda considered her useful enough to keep alive. Her testimony could expose the organization that created Eveline, assuming she ever gave all of it, and Rose would want answers for reasons beyond bioterror investigations. Ethan sacrificed himself. Mia was the parent who returned. Where was she? Capcom may be holding that question for Rose's future. It may also stay buried beneath the time jump, one more family conversation we never get to hear. Until then, Mia's status is alive after Village, absent during Rose's later story, and surrounded by consequences the games haven't resolved. Hound Wolf Squad. Chris Redfield enters the village with his own team. Hound Wolf Squad. Canine. Lobo. Night Howl. Tundra. Umber Eyes. 5 operators who follow Chris through a mission he is conducting outside normal BSAA command. They know Ethan is involved. They know Miranda has replaced Mia. They help assault the village, locate the Megamai seat, and prepare the explosive device that will destroy it. And all 5 survive. That is genuinely rare for a Resident Evil tactical team. Alpha Team, Bravo Team, UBCS platoons, BSAA squads in Kajuju and Edonia. This franchise introduces groups like it is ordering bodies in bulk. Hound Wolf completes the operation and extracts with Chris, Mia, and Rose after Ethan remains behind. The call signs make them easy to remember even when Village gives them limited screen time. Umber Eyes is Chris's second in command, and Sniper. The wider squad covers reconnaissance, communications, weapons support, and the ugly practical work around a bioweapon site. They banter over radio and respond to Chris like people who have worked with him long enough to question his decisions without abandoning him. They also participate in a cover-up of their own, at least initially. Chris refuses to tell Ethan the truth about Miranda because he believes withholding information will keep the family safe. It goes badly. Members of the squad call him on it. That roughness makes them feel more like an actual unit than another line of helmeted casualties. Then K9 uncovers the BSAA's secret. During extraction, Chris learns that the BSAA sent a soldier into the village. When the body is opened, it appears to be an artificial humanoid bioweapon deployed as an operative. The organization founded to stop bioterror has fielded a BOW as personnel. Chris orders the pilot to head for BSAA Europe headquarters. Hound Wolf is with him. For 5 years, that aircraft was their last known position. We had no answer for what happened at the headquarters, whether Chris found allies or whether the people behind the synthetic soldier tried to erase the squad. Resident Evil Requiem finally confirms that the Wolves remain active in 2026. When Leon Kennedy and Grace Ashcroft become trapped beneath the ruins of Raccoon City, Chris sends Hound Wolf Squad into the ARC facility. Umber Eyes leads on the ground while Chris remains off-site. The team rappels into the collapsing structure, finds Leon and Grace alive, and pulls them out. That is a pretty serious jump from Forgotten Squad in the Village ending to the people who come for Leon when the lights go out. Umber Eyes even passes Leon a message from Chris before the extraction. The whole team gets away after completing the rescue and recovering Elpis material from the site. Their relationship with the BSAA is still awkward. Hound Wolf has operated largely beyond headquarters control, yet the IRK mission places them beside personnel from the North American branch. Whatever confrontation followed Village, Chris found enough space to keep his hand-picked unit alive and moving. The BSAA bioweapon soldier remains unresolved. Requiem confirms cooperation without explaining who approved that deployment or what Chris learned in Europe. Houndwolf may trust specific branches and personnel while treating the organization's command structure as compromised. That is an inference. The games have not given us Chris's report from the headquarters. The arc ending leaves the squad with another enemy. After Houndwolf withdraws, a Connection Special Operations unit enters the remaining facility, kills the BSAA personnel left behind, and retrieves its own objective. Those operatives hurry because they fear the wolves may return, so this team is alive, active, and known by the people trafficking biological research. They survived Miranda, learned the BSAA was fielding a BOW, and 5 years later rescued Leon and Grace from underneath Raccoon City. Houndwolf has officially escaped the forgotten list. There is one passenger whose future looks even more dangerous than theirs. Rose is an obvious answer, so set her aside. Her life has already been followed. Mia's absence is open, although she is visible and human when rescued. The largest unresolved threat on this list began years earlier, after another operation on an isolated island. Barry Burton brought a child home. He believed he was saving her, and inside that child, somebody else may have been waiting for the right moment to wake up. Natalia Corda. Natalia Corda survives the Terra Grigia panic as a little girl. Terra Grigia kills both of her parents. By the time of Resident Evil Revelations 2, Natalia lives under TerraSave's care. She is abducted along with Claire, Moira, and other members of the organization, then taken to Sushestvovani Island. She seems quiet, vulnerable, and unusually calm around the creatures stalking the island. Natalia can sense them before Barry can see them. She points into dark rooms and tells him where something is moving. She perceives the presence of the invisible revenants. Her fear response is strange enough to attract the attention of Alex Wesker, the island's overseer, and the last known surviving subject of Project W. Alex had spent years searching for a way around death. Project W was Oswell Spencer's attempt to shape gifted children into candidates for a new human order. Albert Wesker became its most infamous product. Alex became the researcher Spencer trusted with his immortality work. She discovered that Spencer's body could not survive the procedure in time, abandoned him, and pursued immortality for herself. Her solution was transfer. Alex developed the T-Phobos virus, which responds to fear. Test subjects on the island wore bracelets monitoring their emotional state. When fear passed a threshold, the virus activated. The island became a laboratory where Alex could observe terror, mutation, and mental collapse while looking for a host capable of receiving her consciousness. Natalia's response made her ideal. She had already lived through Terra Grigia. Trauma had altered the way she processed fear. Alex could threaten her, isolate her, and surround her with monsters without producing the response that destroyed other candidates. Natalia possessed the psychological structure Alex wanted, so Alex copied herself into the child. That is the plan the game establishes. Before attempting suicide, Alex begins a process intended to transfer her mind or consciousness into Natalia. Alex's original body survives the gunshot in a mutated state, consumed by the terror she experiences at the instant of death. Meanwhile, the copied Alex remains inside Natalia, dormant during the 6 months between the two halves of the story. Barry arrives looking for Moira and finds Natalia instead. Their partnership is gentle in a way the larger plot almost hides. Barry protects her. Natalia helps him navigate the island. He sees a child caught inside another Umbrella Descendants experiment and decides she is coming home. The mutated Alex sees something else. She becomes desperate to kill Natalia. Because the child now carries the version of Alex that was supposed to replace her, the two cannot comfortably exist together. One is a decaying original body. The other is the successful vessel, still growing, still unaware of what may be forming inside her. In the good ending, Moira returns. Barry's family reunites, and the original Alex is destroyed. Barry adopts Natalia. For a few minutes, it looks like the best possible outcome. The child has a home. Barry has his daughter back. The island's overseer is dead. Then the epilogue moves forward. Natalia is sitting inside the Burton home, reading Franz Kafka. News reports discuss events elsewhere in the Resident Evil world. From another room, Barry calls to her. Her response carries a different confidence, and the passage she reads echoes the language Alex used throughout the game. It is a tiny scene. No transformation, no glowing eyes, no laboratory monitor announcing a transfer percentage. just a child in Barry Burton's house, speaking like Alex Wesker. The game leaves the degree of replacement unconfirmed. Natalia may still be herself, with Alex's consciousness beginning to surface. Alex may be waiting for Natalia's personality to weaken. The transfer may blend both minds together. Fans sometimes state that Natalia has already been fully replaced, although the ending carefully stops before proving that. The possibility alone is enough. Alex possesses knowledge from Project W, Spencer's immortality research, biological experiments, and her own network of collaborators. She planned beyond her physical death. If that mind fully awakens inside Natalia, it awakens within a family connected to the original STRS survivors, TerraSave, and the BSAA. Barry would have no immediate reason to suspect her. He watched the old Alex die. He rescued Natalia from the island. Moira knows the child as another victim. Claire saw Natalia before the 6-month gap and would want her protected. That gives Alex access no infiltration plan could easily reproduce, and it answers the question planted at the beginning. Billy Cohen may still be alive somewhere. Jessica may still control a T-Abyss sample. Jake Muller carries Wesker's blood. Hound Wolf Squad is flying toward a compromised BSAA. Natalia Corda is the greatest active threat among Resident Evil's forgotten survivors because her disappearance allowed Alex Wesker's plan to keep running in complete silence. Barry carried the new body out of the laboratory, gave her a bedroom, and welcomed her into a family. Years have passed inside the timeline since Revelations 2. Natalia would no longer be the small child Barry found. If Alex's consciousness developed with her, then one of the last Weskers has spent those years learning how the Burton family lives. Capcom has never shown us the next morning. The final image remains Natalia at home, turning a page of Kafka while Barry calls from the next room, and the voice answering him may already belong to Alex.